Welcome to Slalom Supply Chain Fireside Chat. I'm your host Harshad Kanvinde, leader of Slalom's global supply chain practice. Our guest today is Deborah Dull, founder of Circular Supply Chain Network. We talk about the need and the urgency for the circular supply chains, the challenges in realizing the vision of circularity, and some practical solutions. Welcome everyone to the Slalom Supply Chain Fireside Chat. In today's episode, we have Deborah Dull of Circular Supply Chain Network. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank
It's
you
an
very much.
absolute honor to have you here. Deborah, why don't we start with an introduction of yourself? You have done a lot over the years, and you're circular nomad, so would love to hear from you, your journey and what you have been doing.
Sure, thank you, and thanks for having me on. I love supply chain. It's my favorite topic. The way that inventory moves through our supply chains is particularly interesting to me. And through my career, I've had the chances to use supply chain to see what's possible to make a good positive impact in the world. I started my career at Microsoft. They did a tremendous job helping me to become a great supply chain professional. And then I switched industries and spent some time in international development and public health with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, exploring the ways that supply chain is constraining health outcomes in frontier markets. Then I pivoted again. I learned about circular economy about 3-4 years ago. And it really, the first couple of thoughts in my mind was, gosh, that seems like the supply chain impacts of this are pretty major, but I couldn't find any leaders in that space developing the content that I really wanted to read. So I started to research it myself and joined General Electric in the digital arm, developing industrial software. If we can get industry to shift more towards circularity, the impact will be far, far greater than if we can get every municipality in the world shifted just based on resource use and waste creation. So by day, I spend time with the industrial leaders of the world. By evening and weekend, we have this nonprofit called the Circular Supply Chain Network, members around the world, volunteers around the world, and we're really exploring how do we create a space for supply chain professionals who are curious about circularity and what it means for our field. What can we do to get ready since these changes are coming, and they're coming really rather quite quickly.
Fantastic. And maybe something about, you call yourself circular nomad. So
Sure.
what is that? Why
Sure.
nomad?
So it's a combination of two terms. So of course, circularity, the circular economy, and a digital nomad. So the idea of putting those two together. Of course, during this last year, 14 months, there has been less nomad than normal. For the last 10 years or so, I've been working remote and on the move quite frequently across the border, at least once or twice a month. I was based in Europe for quite a while and then spent quite a bit of time going between Seattle and Africa. And spending lots of my time over there. So I've created this love for finding new ways to look at the world by going to try new items at restaurants and new cocktails and meeting new people. And I think that's really interesting in the way that I really find joy in life. Of course, this last year has been a little bit more difficult, but I look forward to when we're able to get back on the road and to start exploring the world in a different way, connecting with supply chain professionals and starting to observe processes. I think we all sort of look at processes the same way. And if you're like me, waiting at a borderline, I absolutely do time studies and imagine how many booths there are and the average time per booth, and I calculate and see how close my estimation is for getting through the borderline. But that's who we are.
That's not geeky at all.
It absolutely is, but that's what we're here to do, right?
No, that's awesome. So I think we are drawn to the concept of circularity as well in the broader context of what is happening with climate and the sustainability of the environment, as well as other aspects of it. And especially when you talk about circularity, in my mind, a simple mental map is that's great because that brings in innovation. You have to do something that's not only great for the environment, it's at the same time great for the business. It's exciting for people who are working in those businesses. So really great to have you, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. Would love to hear from you, how you see circularity, and what's your circular supply chains. Why does it matter, and why now?
Yeah, great question. Listen, I realize most of us don't sit around thinking about economic models. The last time I took an economics class, I was 18, so I totally get that. The simplest way I can describe a circular economy is in contrast to today's linear economy. That's what we spent the last 100, 150 years building, which essentially means we take something from the planet, we make it super efficiently, and when we're done, we stop using it. When we stop using it, it might go to landfill, it might go someplace else. What the circular economy says is, look, the materials we're using around the world, materials and resources, so think plastics, metals, wood, heat, water, etc., they have more value left to give before we're done with them. And today we're sort of giving them one shot, in some cases, a few chances to add value to the economy. But the economic principle here says if we can reuse something more than once, we can charge more money for it, and it'll add more value into the economy. It costs less to create work in a circular economy, which means we can afford to put more people to work and run our supply chains better. If we also think about the supply chain repercussions of this, it's quite exciting. So if we think about inputs, instead of coming from a primary or virgin source used for the first time, it's being used again, and the premise being to refurbish before we build new, then we're not going to start from scratch every time. So if we're not starting from mine to operation every single time, we can actually go faster. And if we're not needing to buy all of that raw material and pay for all the transformation and value add, it can also be less expensive. We see examples of this, of course, in consumer lands of reused cars and certified pre-owned vehicles. The automotive industry has gotten a hold of this idea and is making a ton of money. And we're very happy to do it because we get a certified pre-owned car. But I'd say they were on the leading edge of putting in these ideas of refurbishing, remanufacturing, using refurbished spare parts, and essentially being able to take out all of the extra effort and leverage the work that's already been done. So that's the general premise of what this economic concept is saying. And like you said, it's really cool because it means better business operations for us. We can actually lower our risk and disruption, which we can talk about. But it also means that we can dramatically lower our carbon emissions. We can help with the global decarbonization goals. We can work with our ESG goals. And so whatever type of corporate commitments your company is setting, it's a great strategy for us to use to both improve supply chain performance and also go after these environmental goals that our organizations are setting.
No, I think so. One of the things that you said, so refurbished cars or certified pre-owned cars, probably they were not even thinking of when those business models came up. I don't even know when, maybe 10, 15, more than that years back. Circular economy as a concept was probably not even talked about at that
Very
point, but
new
it happened.
at that point.
That's
Yep.
great, right? So
Yep.
people who are looking for innovative business model organically, this emerged because it made sense.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, the very valid point you're making, that this makes economic sense. It's not just you're doing it because it's good for the environment or good for the community. It just made sense all around, and that's exciting. Do you see, I think now what's happening, at least from our vantage point, what we see, there is a consumer pull for that as well. So it would make more and more sense to do circular economy based business models. How do you see that impacting many different industries, or where you are seeing which industries, which companies are paving the path, so to say, structurally kind of going after circular economy based business models, versus where you see there is more room for improvement?
Yeah, really good question. You know, as we start to try to get this concept across, we often use consumer-facing examples, and I'm using the royal we here. We, the circularity community, uses examples that we can connect to in our daily lives. And this is positive because we can connect emotionally to it. We all have clothing and cell phones. But it's tough because I think it doesn't tell the whole story. So the areas that are starting to get better focus are, you know, any plastic bottle in your house, whether it has soap or shampoo. The folks at Procter & Gamble and Unilever are seeing that if they put the environmental savings on the front of the package, are seeing upwards of 80% increase
Wow.
of sales of that package versus the one next to it that doesn't say, made 80% made with ocean plastics, right? So it's saying we're sourcing from another place, we're giving this plastic another life. So plastics has been a very interesting place, consumer-facing plastics especially. All of us have probably seen hats, leggings, shoes made from ocean plastics or reclaimed plastics. And so it represents a very interesting space, this post-consumer, post-use plastic industry. So we're starting to see a shift, very marketable shift from a materials perspective in plastic-based items. We are seeing some positive shifts in electronics, and I'll pick on Apple for a second. We all might remember a few years ago, if something happened in your iPhone, it was kind of too bad because it was super glued shut. You couldn't open it up at all for proprietary reasons. There's a lot of right to repair laws being passed around the world. A big center of that is in Europe, which basically says, as a consumer, if I buy something, I have a right to have that repaired, whether it's to change a faulty battery or change out the screen that might have been cracked. I don't want to have to buy a brand new item. And now we're probably happy about it because of the chip shortage we've got. So there's not a lot of new electronics to buy these days. So we're starting to see those shifts. What I think we could do more of is have more understanding of the supply chains, which perhaps aren't as visible to us as consumers, but we see them, but we don't think about them. So for example, this morning you got up, you flipped on the light switch, you went over and flipped on the faucet. You have used the internet many times today. Behind all of those, often public utilities, are real physical supply chains that require planning and spare parts and operations. And we don't hear as much about those supply chains that actually run society. And I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's just not quite as sexy or cool as Google or Amazon or Microsoft. But those haven't gotten as much press. And this is a little concerning because these operations actually use more resources and produce more waste than anything in a municipality. So it's worth exploring those and becoming a little bit smarter about those. But you can start to imagine, as you are doing your role as a supply chain professional from home, probably right now, you are using the internet to do your job. Those server farms sit somewhere. They're served by some energy source. They're maintained with some type of spare parts with some type of engineers. So there's lots to unpack here. So I'd say consumer facing is starting to get more attention, which is positive. And again, I understand the need to have us all connect to the stories from an emotional perspective. But we also need to remember there's this entire industrial space that we really need to focus on if we're going to reduce our resources.
Right. So consumer is just the tip of the iceberg,
Yeah.
if you want to say that. And would you then say that, is it fair to say that we are just starting this journey, long way to go, and not enough time to go there, right? So
that's right. Yep.
This is urgent. This is urgent.
It is.
This is not a luxury that time is not the luxury that we can afford.
No, we've got a couple of urgency pushes, right? So we're running out of materials on the planet. I mean, logically that makes sense, but we have less than 50 years of mineable gold, for example. Gold is really important to the electronics and the way we run the world. We also have a lot of carbon issues and our temperature around the world. Of course, we know all of these statistics. What we may not know is how much power we have in supply chain to change the way that these systems are run. And we have a lot of choice autonomy outside of a business model. So I think there's a lot that we can push on. If I think about some of the research done in this space, Gartner is saying by 2030, supply chains will no longer create waste. It means everything that comes out will be sold to someone else, which is, the premise of circularity. Folks at McKinsey give it more like 2025, that there just won't be the luxury of producing waste anymore. Now that's 3.5 years from now. That's like an ERP upgrade away. That's not a lot of time to make a lot of changes.
Exactly. Not much happens in 3.5 years if history is any guide. No, that's so one more thing. One of the quotes that I have loved always use, that everything is inventory, right? So it's not just the material and the finished good, but circularity as a concept. So everything is inventory. You use the example of refurbished cars or reusing the material. What role does the technology play in getting visibility into that material supply chain or inventory throughout the supply chain, having the assurance enough that, hey, this is a good material that can be reused, or this is bad in certain way. So I imagine that that's a Herculean task, just to know what's reusable, what's not, and if it's not reusable, in what ways it's damaged, so that something can be done. How do you see at that problem in circularity, or enabling circularity,
Yeah,
knowing where the material is, and the quality of that material, and
yeah.
what role technology?
Okay, this is a big one. So
Loaded question, yeah. Very big.
every year, 100 billion tons of material enters the global economy. And as supply chain professionals, we're the ones that put it there, period. Their procurement doesn't happen without us. So we put in and move 100 billion tons of materials into the global economy every year. Now, our friends at Circularity, a great organization based in Amsterdam, have do the math every year for how circular is the world. Last year, we were 8.6% circular, which means over 90 billion tons of material got one shot to add value into our economy, which is a bummer because we can do a lot more with that. And scale is not the problem here. We've got plenty to deal with. There are other types of barriers, and we can talk about those. So as we start to imagine the role of technology, it's twofold. The assets inside of our supply chain, the operations inside of our control, is actually an easier place to start. We think about digital process maps, maybe a digital twin, some version of understanding what's going on through our supply chains, both in terms of extending asset life. So any capital equipment you have, how do we do a better job keeping those running forever? Also, the everything that goes into our processes, even that's not the final material. So it might be, water, air, it might be packaging, it might be consumables, whatever's going into our processes. We have control over that. And it's sort of a hidden space right now, not really talked about even in the circularity community. So all of this we have control over, even though it's really hard even to just track that. Now, the kicker comes with this over 90 billion tons every single year around. So if you look around your room right now in front of you, whatever you see, everything you see is inventory, of course. And in the future, what's going to be really hard is our definition of capital equipment of a certain dollar value and a certain lifespan is going to start to expand, because the idea is that everything should be able to last forever. And if it can't be, then it needs to be able to be adding value back into the environment. So if it's going to be compostable, it needs to actually be positive net add. So we start to imagine, okay, my monitors, my lamps, my light bulbs, my pillows, my lamp, plants, whatever's around us, we have to start considering as an input to another process. That's going to be really tough to do. I don't think we have the technology to enable us to do that today. But there are some interesting prototype facilities being built to take mixed waste and with no emissions to come out with like virgin commodities that can be then used again. So there's a couple of different races going on here around how do we do a better job with the materials we already have, and how do we process those in a way that we can actually use again. There's also a school of thought around bio-based materials. A company, Zymergen, just went public. They believe that more than half of those 100 billion tons every year can be made from biology instead of from inside the planet. Super cool, totally different. But without the ability to understand where materials are today, or give some level of new type of demand signal. So again, if everything coming into your operation is coming from another operation, we need to be giving a different type of demand signal, and they need to be giving us a different type of supply plan for like waste streams that are going to start to become the underbelly value streams supporting our primary value streams that are zooming around. So it's going to be an interesting problem to solve, a fun one to start imagine. And I'll just call out, right now we spend a lot of time getting towards the point of sale. And once it's sold, we're happy, we've made the money. But that is going to shift, and we're really going to start the journey at point of sale. Then imagine that we never produced anything new ever again. We only maintain and upgrade everything that already exists in the world. Those are the types of problems we need to start thinking about. In a very, very likely reality in the coming 10 years is that we're going to be remanufacturing or refurbishing more than we build new, which is a whole nother set of problems for us. More skilled labor, not less, for example, which is how automation has been taking us.
And I believe, and tell me if it's you are seeing the same thing, the enormity of the problem or the opportunity. I think if you want to look at it positively, it's huge, and many people would probably nod their heads that yeah, this is important, this is exciting, this is the right way to go. Some changes that we see is many companies are moving from selling a product to guaranteeing yield or guaranteeing services.
Yep.
So from product-based companies to services-based companies, that would hopefully aid, and it will create the right incentives. As you said, sales is the starting point, not the end point. So you're guaranteeing the outcome the customers are desiring, and change the company, change the businesses accordingly. So when that's happening, and I kind of see that in my interactions with executives as well, no one is saying that, hey, this is not a good thing to do. Then what's preventing? So structurally, what's happening here? Why there are still the circularity just 8% and not more than that? Or are you seeing what's the rate of change there?
Yep.
So maybe let's talk about when you talk to the executives and everyone, not just C-suite or not just the VP and above executives, but even senior managers, other managers and people working in these companies.
Yep.
What's preventing them to do the right thing or take their companies in the right direction?
Really good question. I'll talk about two layers. The first one is rather basic, but stick with me. We can't really define what does it mean to be circular. We kind of can, but when we start to really drill into the details, it's tougher to measure what it is we're talking about. And part of why it's difficult is because we don't have industry-wide standards yet. There are a number of working groups within the ISO organization. I know GS1 is looking at this, both standards organizations. In my day job at GE, we are a founding member of the North America Capital Equipment Coalition, really aiming at building these industry standards together with companies like Philips, SAP, Microsoft, Accenture, and so forth. And once we understand the way I measure circularity in one factory, once that's passed off to the next factory, I can give them not only the physical good, but also a digital companion that says during this last shift, when this item was made, these are the types of energy sources. So we had wind energy only, or on this shift, actually, we had energy made from coal. Whatever the case is, here's all the items that went into it that aren't visible as a physical good. And of course, the passport that goes along with it saying for the physical good, this is where the items came from. Let's say it came from 40% post-use. So we'll give it a little bit of a circularity score. However, the challenge is I can calculate that today. We have the data to do it. The problem is it doesn't mean anything. If I hand it off to the next factory, they're using somebody else's execution software and we don't have a way to hand off. So big barrier number one is, of course, around measurements and standards. Sounds super boring, but in reality, if we can nail this, we can really accelerate the rest of the conversation. So this is something, of course, we call co-opetition. We have to cooperate across industry before we can go off and compete with each other.
Right.
The second big barrier is more, is at a higher level, and this is around a number of market failures we have. We sometimes struggle to find enough high quality secondary materials in the right quantity, so quality and quantity, available to produce whatever it is we're trying to produce. So for example, I was speaking with the good folks over at Henkel Home Goods in Europe, tremendous leaders in this space, doing a lot, investing a lot in trying to sort out plastics, for example. And they were telling me a story of they were doing fine with secondary plastics market in Europe. Then Nestle announced that from the next day, they'd only be using secondary plastics in whatever type of water bottles or something they were making. And all of a sudden, overnight, the secondary plastics market dried up for everybody else. And so we have this strange challenge of trying to find these materials, which is confusing because we also have more than 90 billion tons up for grabs every year. And so what then we go and find is that actually the way that we process materials after they've been used has a lot left to be desired. So in the United States, for example, it's all up to counties. For example, in Seattle, I can recycle anything and it can be mixed, and there's separation machines that do this. I go across the mountains to rural Washington State, where I was raised, and we have no recycling services at the house. You can drive some recycling to the recycling center, but no glass bottles. Of course, when I go and drink wine with my mother, then I drive my wine bottles back across the mountain so I can recycle. But I share that story because we just don't have the infrastructure to process this. And so far, there hasn't been a clear path for the municipalities to invest in this business. Now, if we could find a way to have the end result be more valuable than it is today, now we can start to rebuild. But we just have sort of market failure after barrier. In other countries, through the EU, for example, we see in their new Green Deal, they have a circular economy action plan, and they have lots of financial assistance, incentives, grant programs to be able to start unlocking and moving what's possible. They also have different types of infrastructure. For example, if you do go out and have a beer, that bottle is not crushed and remelted, which is hugely energy resource intensive. They actually just wash it and refill it with beer and sell it again. So lots of infrastructure challenges, but I believe that supply chain professionals are best placed to solve for this challenge, because all we do all day long is go look for constraints. We find those constraints, we articulate them and measure them, and then we go and exploit the system within those constraints. And so this becomes a really, really fun and cool problem for us to solve. And if we can solve it, our supply chains will be more resilient and less risk prone, which right now I think all of us would welcome.
That's enlightening, and as you said, I think clearly this is a Herculean task. Many moving pieces there, some in control of a company. I mean, you mentioned early on that industry plays a big role here. The P&Gs and Unilevers and Henkel and Nestle, all the companies play a big role. But then the governments, municipalities, counties, they play an equally important role. So lots of moving pieces. And this is still day one, $90 billion worth of material a year still going to waste, need to do something about it. So where do you start? I mean, if you think about a GE or if you think about a P&G, some companies probably already way farther ahead than some others. So if you're talking to the or your people in your network, circular supply chain network, how these warriors, for lack of better terms, fighting these battles every day in, day out, and what's the advice you will have for people like me and people like you interact with in your day to day? What can we do every day?
Two places to start. One is much easier, so I'll start with that one. Inside your company, there's a good chance someone cares about circularity. It may be the same person as whoever is looking at sustainability. They may report through corporate. In some cases, it actually is the same person as a chief supply chain officer. We're seeing more and more that the chief sustainability officer and chief supply chain officer are the same person. So the first way to get started is go find that person, whoever they might be, and see what their goals are. See if they've met the supply chain or not. In global circularity meetings that I've attended, it's shocking because I'll go, hi, oh, nice to meet you, head of sustainability XYZ. Great. What does your supply chain think about what you're doing? And they'll kind of tip their head at me and go, my who? Why would I talk to them? Like they don't think to come and talk to us, even though we're the ones to operationalize. So go introduce yourself, invite yourself to the party. That's the easy part. The harder part is pick a process. It could be a manufacturing facility. It could be just a line. Pick a process and go try to figure out everything that's coming in and where it came from, and everything that's going out and where it's going to. This is going to be way harder than it seems like, because once we get to tier 2, 5, 7, 9 up the supply chain, we don't really know where it came from. And we're not as worried about country. That we'll get to that. We want to shorten our supply chains physically because that's along the principles of using less. But just try to figure out if it's primary or secondary. Is this the first time that item has been used, the material has been used ever, or is it post-use? Just try to figure that piece out. and figure out, if you use analytics software from the cloud for your factory, where is that server and what power is used to fuel that server farm. Those types of ideas, try to figure that out. Then go see what goes out the front door and the back door. Front door is anything that's a finished good. That should be relatively easy to sort out. It should align with your BOM. And everything out the back door is going to be tougher because we don't like to talk about our waste. It's almost no one actually really writes it down. And so go and learn what's happening. Now, your waste streams, you can start to find buyers for it. Industrial waste in America is a $57 billion a year industry already. This is not new for us. We're doing this all the time. But I predict this will expand tenfold in the coming years easily. As you know, it's only waste because we haven't found a customer for it yet. So once we have a customer, all of a sudden it becomes a value stream. And in the supply chain, you heard it here, folks, you have a chance to become a revenue center. Finally, at last, we have a way to make money. So those are the two ways to get started. One is super easy. One is going to be tougher than we think it is. But without the ability to even measure the items moving through our value chains, we're in a tough spot if we're going to try to actually change it or improve it.
So knowing where you are today and knowing it at a deeper level, that's the key. I think that's where you start. Open some eyes, educate people, keep talking about this topic. I think there is a long way to go. And as we talked earlier, not much time left. Yep. So it's urgent. It's urgent. Deborah, it's always great to talk to you. We can go on for hours. You have a lot to share, and maybe I'll call you up again for the future sessions. But this was great. Thanks a lot for spending time with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.